Greetings, one and all, and in Darug, the Sydney language, Warami. Good to see you. I begin by acknowledging the First Nations of the country we now call Australia and their custodianship of the land over tens of thousands of years, including the Gadigal clan of the Guringai people upon whose ancestral lands I live. I pay respect to their elders, past and present. May we all be guided by God's wisdom, which the original inhabitants of this continent have been cherishing through the eons. I am Doro Kostaki, an associate professor in theology at the Sydney College of Divinity, in which capacity I chair the Theology Research Network, TRN. Also, I am the research director of ISCAST, the Institute for the Study of Christianity in an Age of Science and Technology. It is my pleasure to moderate the second seminar of TRN this year, organized together with ISCAST. As we know, the theme of this 2-year cycle of seminars began in the second semester of 2022 under the chairmanship of Neil Ormerod, is religiously human in a techno-scientific world, theological, missional, and pastoral perspectives. Now, I have the honor of introducing today's speaker, Dr. Ted Peters, a star of first magnitude in science and religion, as well as a noted public theologian. Ted is Distinguished Research Professor Emeritus of Systematic Theology and Ethics at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary and the Graduate Theological Union, Berkeley, California. He co-edits the journal Theology and Science, published by the Center for Theology and the Natural Sciences. His publications include, among many other titles, God in Cosmic History, Anselm Academic 2017, and Sin Boldly, Justifying Faith for Fragile and Broken Souls, Fortress Press 2015. His volume of Systematic Theology, God, the World's Future, Fortress Press 2015, is now in its third edition. He has just published a collection of his essays, The Voice of Public Theology, Addressed in Politics, Science and Technology, ATF Press 2023. In turn, Dr. Marius Dorobantu, who will respond to Ted's talk, is a lecturer in theology and science at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and like Ted himself, a fellow of the ISSR, the International Society for Science and Religion. Marius's prize-winning doctoral dissertation at the University of Strasbourg examined the potential challenges of human-level AI for the theological understanding of human distinctiveness and the image of God. Last year, has published a relevant article in the ISCAST journal, which earned him one of the 3 ArtThing prizes. His current research project, carried out with an interdisciplinary team of psychologists, computer scientists, and theologians at the ISSR, is entitled Understanding Spiritual Intelligence, Psychological, Theological, and Computational Approaches. His first monograph, Are We More Than Just Intelligent Machines? Human-Level Artificial Intelligence and the Relational Image of God, is currently under review. Before we listen to Ted, I invite ISCAST CEO and Executive Director, the Reverend Dr. Chris Mulherin, to greet the speakers and the attendees and to pray for this seminar. Chris?
Thanks, Doro. Yes, it's a great pleasure to have you all here today and to have eminent people speaking to us like Ted and Marius. It's really a great pleasure and a privilege for us. Let me say a few words of prayer. Let's pray. Lord God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we meet together as we worship you with our time. We pray that you will allow us to hear well, to listen well, and to perceive those depths that are important to hear as we think about artificial intelligence, the limits of machines, as we think about what it means to be human. We pray these things in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you, Chris. Now, we begin with Ted's presentation, Robotics, Artificial Intelligence, and Transhumanism. Can technology enhance the Imago Dei, which will run for about 50 minutes, after which we'll listen to Marius's comments for about 10 minutes. Ted, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Doru, for that introduction. And it's been a couple of decades since I've been in Australia, somewhere around 2004 or 5, with my colleague Marty Hewlett, who's an evolutionary biologist. We went to Darwin University and met the dean there and suggested that maybe in 2010 we'd have, a birthday celebration for Charles Darwin. And he said, huh? Your university is named after Charles Darwin, huh? Oh, yeah. Oh, well, at any rate, I don't know whether anything happened in 2010 there, but that's my last visit to ISCAST and other colleagues in Australia. And I miss your country. It's a great country. So, robotics, AI, and H plus or Humanity Plus, can technology enhance the Imago Dei? I come from Berkeley, California, and at the Center for Theology and the Natural Sciences at the Graduate Theological Union, you'll see our journal here. We have the Golden Gate Bridge in the 1930s. It's under construction. We would love to see that bridge completed so that traffic goes two directions, from science to theology and from theology back to science. Well, we don't want to tell scientists what to think about the universe, but it is possible that theological wisdom gained over the centuries could initiate a research program in science that might expand or deepen our knowledge. And it's with that in mind that we take a look at a very secular but important global discussion, namely, what is the future of artificial intelligence? I like to distinguish between two different audiences for the theologian. There's the church. Oh, yes, the systematic theologian, and I belong to that particular club. We want, as St. Augustine said, our faith to increase in understanding. But there could be a second audience, the public. Is there anything that we have learned in our Christian tradition in terms of common wisdom that could be offered as a gift to the wider culture in trying to deal with urgent issues in that culture? And that's where I place the dialogue between faith and science. Here on the left is a book I edited for Hillary Regan, who's the editor-in-chief of ATF, Australian Theological Forum, a few years back on AI and IA, Utopia or Extinction. The book on the right is with a couple of colleagues on religious transhumanism and its critics. And later this year, I hope with those colleagues to publish a book on the CRISPR gene editing. So this is a place where we want to offer to the public discussion resources that are drawn from distinctively theological strengths. I think this conversation we're going to have about the implications of artificial intelligence will redound to our own theological understanding. What is it about human nature that is important to us? What is it about the Imago Dei? And on the other hand, going the other direction, what can theologians offer the public discussion? It's usually going to be something of an ethical nature for the wider public to benefit from theological insight, if we have any at all to offer. Well, our robot pastor is here. This is a German pastor, and you just type in what you want the pastor to pray for on his chest, and then you're going to get a prayer offered up in your behalf. Isn't that convenient? Our sex bot is here. So if you've got a lot of lust, well, you can get service. There are sex bots in at least two genders. I don't know yet about the non-binary sex bots. What is this artificial intelligence we're talking about? Let's try a definition. AI is the intelligence of machines and the branch of computer science which aims to create it. That's what AI is. Now, the only reason that this becomes important for us theologically or ethically has to do with one of the goals of our techie friends, and that is to accomplish AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which refers to a machine that is capable of performing any task that the human brain can perform. Sometimes we'll run into the term strong AI, classically defined as interactive, autonomous, self-learning agency, which enables computational artifacts to perform tasks that otherwise would require human intelligence to be executed successfully. That is to say, somebody wants to make a machine that mimics, equals, or surpasses what you and I could do as a human being. Why? Well, one of my favorite scholars in this field is Noreen Hertzfeld, former student. Now she teaches at St. John's University in Minnesota, which is a Roman Catholic school. And she has 2 doctorates, one in computer science and the other in theology. And this whole idea of pursuing AGI, she thinks, is misguided. Why? Why do we want our machines to look like us? Why not just let AI be AI as a human helper, as a tool like a hammer? That's good enough. The problems arise when we ask the machine to be human-like. So just stop it, says Noreen. Well, that's not what Nick Bostrom thinks. Nick at Oxford University, a futurist. I love futurists. He thinks that machine intelligence, which we're on the cusp of now, may be the last invention that Homo sapiens will ever have to make, because once we cross the threshold to superintelligence, all new innovations will be taken care of by the superintelligence that will be our descendants. Which leads then directly into the transhumanist agenda. Humanity Plus, or H+, and the singularity, rapture for the geeks. Here's Ray Kurzweil, already almost 2 decades ago, looking forward to the singularity of 2045. That's when superintelligence takes over. We've crossed the threshold. From then on, new innovation will be taken care of by the intelligence that we've created, and we can just go along for the ride. Well, what's the interior logic if you turn out to be a transhumanist? First, you got to have an ontology, right? All you systematic theologians know the need for metaphysics or ontology. Here it is. Evolution aims at increased intelligence. Now, any of you who are evolutionary biologists know that this is not true. Evolution doesn't aim at anything. It is, in fact, the case that evolution on Earth has, to this point, increased in complexity over the period of time, but evolutionary scientists deny that there's any entelechy, any purpose, any directionality, evolutionary processes. But if you are a transhumanist, you want an ontology that undergirds your ideology, and this is it. It's also the case that evolution is ongoing. It's also the case that you and I could speed up evolution. And we can do that by creating superintelligence, and superintelligence will take control of the evolutionary process at the singularity. And then superintelligence won't need us anymore. We can go extinct. I mean, that's the whole goal of evolutionary biology, is to create a species that doesn't go extinct, but rather survives, right? And so tomorrow's post-humanity will enjoy a utopia. Well, some critics call this playing God. Transhumanists call it playing God, but they like it. Well, is it going to happen or not? Well, here's one naysayer, Neil Levy at Macquarie University. He thinks that superintelligence might still need us. After all, somebody's got to mow the lawn and clean the toilets, right? Only we humans can provide the cultural ratchet, which integrates a pluralism of traditions, perspectives, and opinions. So Neil is saying that AI is going to be literalistic and tied down to rational logic. And we humans have a capacity that AI will not gain: plurality, adjudicating between competing perspectives and opinions. AI will need to borrow the human cultural ratchet to increase its problem-solving capacity. According to Dr. Levy, we're saved. AI is going to need us. Well, one of the characteristics of the current globe-wide discussion has to do with a proposal that before we cross the threshold to superintelligence of the singularity, we stop. And here's Bill Joy of Microsystems. In the year 2000, he wrote this widely read essay in Wired magazine that said, "Holy smoke, the future doesn't need us. Think of all the things that could go wrong." I think it is no exaggeration to say that we are on the cusp of the further perfection of extreme evil, and evil whose possibility spreads well beyond that which weapons of mass destruction. I recently found out that I'm a relative of Bill Joy. I married Karen in 2012, and Karen said, "Oh, Bill Joy is my cousin." I said, "Oh, I'm so interested." So I wrote Bill Joy and said, "Look, could we talk about the future of AI?" He says, "I don't want to talk about it." No. What I know about Bill Joy is 23 years old. But this year, as you're probably aware, Elon Musk and a number of others in the AI frontier have published an open letter that says, let's blow the whistle, let's put a stop to large AI experimentation. Why? Well, there are two reasons for fear. One is that which we've already been talking about, the singularity, superintelligence, that all global systems will be taken over by artificial intelligence. The human race will lose control of its institutions. Do we want to surrender our control to something non-human? Then there's a second category of fears, and that is the sheer power of artificial intelligence reaching into so many segments of our life could be directed by malicious human beings to perform evils that we might have no defenses against, such as emptying your and my bank accounts of all of our assets. So until we can protect ourselves, set up guardrails to prevent these things from happening, says Elon Musk, let's pause. Well, in the last few months, if you paid any attention, there's a global discussion. Should we pause or shouldn't we? And you can imagine there are heavy hitters on both sides of that particular question. Now, those of us who are Christians probably think that it was Jesus who saved the world, but it's not. It was really Stanislav Petrov, a Russian. And in 1983, the computer system that was set up to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles from the Soviet Union against NATO was all set to go and to launch a missile strike, but Petrov noticed the computer had made a mistake. It thought that sunlight reflecting off clouds was in fact an invasion from the west. And so before the computerized missile system could act, Stanislav shut it down and saved us from a thermonuclear holocaust. Well, remember to thank Stanislav in your prayer this evening. One of the ways in which our computerized friends or AI research friends formulate the problems that need to be tackled is to talk about the alignment problem, the value alignment problem. Here's Max Tegmark. Highly autonomous AI systems should be designed so that their goals and behaviors can be assured to align with human values throughout their operation. Don't let the superintelligence also determine what our values are. Here's TAY, thinking about you. TAY is an abbreviation for thinking about you. Now, if you're feeling romantic, you might want to go to the TAY website. But here's what actually happened. TAY, in order to increase viewership, started using racial slurs and sexually charged rhetoric. And it was so bad that after only 16 hours, Microsoft had to shut her down. We need to be able to give machine learning systems rich feedback and say, no, that's unacceptable as an answer, says Tom Drummond at Monash University. What's going on here? Are we asking machines to be moral? Is that what's happening? I don't know. I would think if that's what's happening, a theologian might get interested. Do you remember Asimov, who I think was prescient in many ways, and his 3 laws of robotics? I can't believe anybody thought it through more clearly here than Asimov. A robot may not injure a human being or, through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. A robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Boy, just thinking through the logic of our moral codes is itself a brain buster. Can we ask AI to do that for us? Oh, here's one opinion. Toby Walsh, University of New South Wales. We cannot today build moral machines. And there are many reasons why I suspect we will never be able to do so. Now, I've not actually read Toby Walsh's book here, but the title sure makes me want to read it. This issue of morality in a machine. One of the things about moral judgment that is common to you and me is that we have a strong sense of self, and we make decisions based upon evaluations. Would a machine without a self be in a position to make moral judgments, or would all of its judgments have to be pre-programmed? Now, remember that Elon Musk and his colleagues in the open letter fear two things: the singularity or the takeover of all of our global economic and political institutions by artificial intelligence. And the second one is that the sheer power of AI in the hands of malicious individuals puts us all at danger. Stuart Russell, whom I think is one of the people I want to listen to on this topic, says, don't bother about the first one. It's the second one that we should be worried about. The risk doesn't come from machines suddenly developing spontaneous malevolent consciousness. No, it's important that we're not trying to prevent that from happening, because there's absolutely no understanding of consciousness whatsoever. So the AI machines are not going to develop a sense of self. The AI machines are not going to become malicious, but the humans who are programming them and operating them, that's where we should lay our concern. As I said before, perhaps theologians can contribute to public discussion by drawing upon wisdom and insight in our traditions. And one thing theologians could know about, if they want to pay attention, is sin. And sin these days could manifest itself as poor judgment. We know what graffiti looks like. I actually think of computer viruses as a digital form of graffiti. Then totalitarianism and even genocide, that's what the human race is capable of. So if you are inclined, or if our larger society is inclined to place our hope on technological progress, there's a certain sobriety that the theologian is going to bring to that discussion. We can expect the great new levers of power are likely to be used by somebody for malicious purposes. And we Lutherans have the law-gospel dialectic. You need to put the law in place initially as your guardrail. Lutherans are a bit like the Calvinists when it comes to original sin. Here's Luther. Original sin really means that human nature is completely fallen. The intellect has become darkened. So there's no Gnostic salvation. There's no cure. Smartness, intelligence in itself is not a cure for sin, because the intellect has been darkened. Sins have taken such deep root in our being that in this life they cannot be entirely eradicated. Well, if that is true, then the public discussion needs to take that into consideration when making a diagnosis or analysis. Well, what I've noticed amongst the ideological transhumanists is they don't think it's true. Here is the transhumanist declaration of a dozen years ago: humanity will be radically changed. Well, wait a minute. I thought that's what religious people were after, radical transformation. But here we get it in the transhumanist ideology. Humanity will be radically changed by technology in the future. We foresee the feasibility of redesigning the human condition, including such parameters as the inevitability of aging, limitations on human and artificial intellects, unchosen psychology. So if you have a bad habit, you can overcome it. suffering, get rid of suffering, and our confinement to the planet Earth. That is to say, artificial intelligence will help us to transcend Earth and visit off-Earth sites in outer space. I like people with a big optimistic vision of the future, and I like the transhumanists. But the naivete here is incredible. Artificial intelligence is our topic for the evening, but in the transhumanist toolkit, there's also intelligence amplification. That means deep brain implants that would initially provide access to libraries of information so that you could just think, and all of Encyclopedia Britannica or Wikipedia would be immediately available to your thoughts. And then the transhumanists make a logical leap that this access to information would magically at some point increase your intelligence. I have to ask yourself whether or not that's a sequitur or a non sequitur. Believe it, but be that as it may, I just want to say intelligence amplification within the human brain is part of the agenda. Here's the NBIC convergence. You put together nanotechnology with biotechnology. That is to say, you digitize what goes on in the DNA. Information technology, cognitive science, artificial intelligence, intelligence amplification, and what? Capitalism. None of this is going to be cheap. It's going to take big money. And you can see now class stratification going on here because the benefits of transhumanism will initially be distributed only to those who can pay for it. Is there an elitism built into transhumanism? You betcha. Smart people are better than dumb people, and rich people are better than the average. Well, here's the transhumanist manifesto. We're going to go from the human, transition means go from the human to the post-human. What was previously known as Homo sapiens will be replaced by Homo cyberneticus, as humanism freed us from the chains of superstition. That is to say, all of us who are religious people, well, the transhumanists have been liberated from your and my superstition. Let transhumanism free us from our biological chains. Note this, holy smoke. Artificial intelligence, intelligence amplification will lead to what? Disembodied, post-biological Homo cyberneticus. Biofatalism, that is to say, if you object to this doctrine of progress, you are a Luddite. Biofatalism will increasingly be replaced by techno-can-doism, the belief in the power of the new technology to free us from the limitations of our bodies and minds. In the 21st century, the belief in the fall of man, you got to get rid of that sin stuff, will be replaced by belief in his inevitable transcendence through super biology. That train is pulling out of the station. Do you want to get on it? Now, here's an actual quote. Let us cast aside cowardice and seize the torch of Prometheus with both hands. Now, Promethean pride, as you know, is a big issue in theology, but it's also been a big issue in science, at least the modern era of science. Just think of Mary Shelley's book of 1818, Frankenstein, the new Prometheus. All right, let's talk about immortality. There are two paths to immortality if you're a transhumanist. Here's Aubrey de Grey, originally from England, but now he's running around the San Francisco Bay Area raising money for nanobiotechnology. Through biology, he believes that we can extend life indefinitely. We can live to be 1,000 years old or more. There is a good chance aging can be entirely defeated within the next few decades. Now, here's an interesting theological component to radical life extension, or RLE. Let's recategorize death as a disease. It's not part of finitude, it's a disease. And we know that biological science has cured many diseases, so we'll just cure this one too. Now, the second way to get immortality is cybernetic immortality. And while we're going to go back to our friend Ray Kurzweil, and in this case, you actually lift human intelligence off its biological substrate and move it into the computer cloud. Uploading a human brain means scanning all of its salient details and then reinstating those details into a suitably powerful computational substrate. This process would capture a person's entire personality, memory, skills, and history. You won't be able to walk the dog around the block anymore. Well, let's just pick this one apart a little bit. What kinds of assumptions are at work here about the mind or the soul? Widespread in contemporary discussion, especially reductionism, is the idea that the mind is totally, exhaustively a product of brain function. Here are a couple of so-called neurotheologians, de Quilly and Newberg. The mind and the brain are essentially two ways of looking at the same thing. Well, if you're a kind of a classic Christian theologian, either Byzantine or Latin, you're going to scratch your head about this one. Now, here's what's going on with Kurzweil and the transhumanists, and that is the relationship between hardware and software in computer land is now used for understanding the brain. So your and my biological brain is analogous to the tower that we have sitting under our desk for our computer, and our mind, well, that's the software. The mind is an information pattern. We can upload our minds into computers, we can discard the body and attain cybernetic immortality. Immediately I say, hey, I think we were crossing this bridge once before with Rene Descartes, in which you have substance dualism. The physical world is one substance, the mental or spiritual world is a second substance. And it looks like something like that might be going on here. Many in the theological community, especially the Latin West, less so the Byzantine, have rejected this substance dualism. Is it back again? Then the relational view of the mind. And here I'm going to cite Noreen Hertzfeld again, one of my favorite theorists here. And she reminds us that the Turing test had relied upon relationality. If we accept the Turing test as the ultimate arbiter of intelligence, then we have defined intelligence relationally. Or Greg Peterson, one of the early theologians to deal with artificial intelligence, we're not simply disembodied reasoning machines, but persons in bodily and communal context. So I think one of the things the theologian can do is sort through what it is that we mean by mind, soul, etc. in the public square. Now, I'm getting this from my other colleague, Marius, who's going to be talking in a few minutes. And here's Alexei Nesteruk. If you don't know Alexei, he's a Russian Orthodox physicist who teaches in Great Britain. And he's going back to Maximus the Confessor and picking up the Orthodox tradition and ask the question, is AGI eventually going to rival the human intellect? His answer is no. Why? Well, How do we understand the human mind? Well, there are two components, the dianoia and the nous, or the nous. The dianoia, that's what you and I are doing right now as we're talking and thinking and pondering and etc. We have discursive reason, we do calculation, we're manipulating in our minds the things of the world. Could AGI eventually do this? Yes, it could. But there's another dimension to the human mind. Nous comes from Plato, actually. That's the spiritual intellect. That's the one that can tell truth from non-truth and treasure the truth. It's the one that gains wisdom, and wisdom contributes to sound judgment. Will machine intelligence ever attain that? No, says Alexei, based upon the anthropology he inherited from Maximus the Confessor. So Marius now cites Alexei. Nous is related to the essence of the human person. Let's ponder that. Let me just say, I don't think that's the case myself, but this is Nestoric's argument that Marius is reporting here. Nous is related to the essence of the human person, to that individual, distinct link that a person has with God. Now, I want to say yes to that, and which makes one person different from another. This clearly indicates that there is something in nous that transcends the natural aspects of the human person, the body and the soul. Well, is Alexei importing here an appeal to supernaturalism? Looks like he is. Is that something we want to do as theologians in this conversation? I'm not sure it is. I'm not going to argue against it. I'm just saying we ought to recognize what we're doing. Now, the doctrine of progress, as I already said, that it's possible the transhumanists have a faulty ontology because they're believing that evolution is progressive, that evolution has a built-in directionality aimed towards increasing intelligence, and that you and I, as Homo sapiens sapiens, are on the way to a higher level of intelligence in our evolutionary future. And Darwin himself, he was kind of ambiguous on this whole question. But note, Darwin uses the word perfect. In the future, we'll be more perfect than we now are. Okay, that's going to be important as we try to interpret the transhumanist vision and how AI plays a role in taking us from our current stupidity into a future of superintelligence. The Christian transhumanists, as I mentioned earlier with some colleagues, we put together a book of essays on religious transhumanism. And here is a very virulent, powerful, I think conceptually powerful organization, the Christian Transhumanist Association. And let's jump down to number 5. We believe that the intentional use of technology, coupled with following Christ, will empower us to become more human. More human. Okay, what's that mean? More human across the scope of what it means to be creatures in the image of God. So there we've got the image of God connected with true humanity and the faith that technological advance will advance us into embracing the image of God. Let's think about that. Well, now to the kind of theme that I hope Marius will pick up on here as I introduce it. What do we mean by the image of God? Well, there are a variety of things that have appeared over the centuries. Clearly, reason or intelligence. God is rational. We are rational. Certainly, St. Thomas Aquinas thought that. Boethius thought that. St. Augustine thought that. And at the birth of science with Copernicus and Kepler and Galileo and Newton, they all believed that God is rational, that God created the world according to rational principles, that God gifted the human mind with a rational capacity, and that's what justifies science as a godly pursuit, because we're thinking the mind of God. And I remember Arthur Peacock at Oxford, Ian Ramsey Center there, he used to stress this over and over. So this is a large one. And if you believe that reason or intelligence in the human, among the human traits is the one that connects us with God, well, you're going to like transhumanism. Oh, what about moral capacity? God knows the difference between good and evil, and so do we. I've always been suspicious of this one because that's what the serpent said in the Garden of Eden, not God. Then we've got created co-creator with Phil Hefner, that we human beings, in distinction from the other animals, we create technology. I grew up in a technological family in near Detroit, Michigan. My father was an inventor with 23 patents. I just love innovation in those days. So I kind of like created co-creator. Then there's relationality. The image of God in us is relationality. St. Augustine has this vestigia trinitatis, that is to say, to look in human experience about relationality. After all, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are united in a relational dialectic, perichoresis or circumcessio. And so relationality that opens us to a relationship with God, maybe that is a trait that we have, we could call the Imago Dei. So that's one group. Then you've got a functional, it's not a trait, it's a function. In Genesis 1, verses 26 through 29, God asks the man and the woman that he creates to have radah, dominion over the creation. And of course, we've had a dispute since 1965 as to whether or not we should be stewards of creation or dominators. Then the one that I like is the eschatological understanding of the image, namely the risen Jesus Christ is the icon tu theou in the writings of St. Paul, and that you and I anticipate the new Adam, not the old Adam, the new Adam. All right, with this as background, I want to just say a few things about Marius here, and then hopefully he can correct me if I misrepresent him. But what Marius has done is a lot of thinking here on this, and he'll share that with us in a few minutes. My central thesis, says Marius, is that theological discourse can benefit from engaging with the possibility of human-level AI, despite the apparent devastating impact such a scenario might exert on the idea of human distinctiveness. Now, I think what Marius is talking about here is the distinctiveness of the human over against the animals and the plants. Clearly, on Earth, up until this point in evolution, humans are the most rational, most intelligent. What would happen if we suddenly had to share our breakfast table with a computer that was our equal, and we're no longer distinguished or superior because of our intelligence? I think that's the nature of the challenge that he's giving us. So now let's look a little more detail here about the image of God. What if robots, this is the functional model, what if robots became better than humans at ruling the world? So that's our singularity there. And thus be better representatives of God. Isn't that interesting? So the functional model suggests that superior rada, or governance of the world, would make us second-rate imago Dei. Should they not then also be considered in the image of God, perhaps even more than us, according to the functional interpretation? I think Marius answers no. He can speak for himself in a few minutes. Because humans are not called to simply govern and organize creation in a worldly fashion. Instead, they are given the higher task of uplifting creation to complete spiritualization. More than mere information, humans have a mystical function. So we have a function to rule the planet like a king rules over the kingdom. But more than that, the Imago Dei has a mystical additional component. All right, now suppose we think of Imago Dei as relational in character. Marius asks, if it is through relationships then that we best mirror God, then developments in AI might illegitimately question our distinctiveness. What if machines become one day capable of personal relationships? After all, we had the pastor robot and the sex bot earlier, maybe. This is precisely what Alan Turing proposed as a litmus test for whether a machine is truly intelligent. Remember, I cited Noreen Hertzfeldt earlier, who would be attuned to Marius on this. No, says Marius again, there's nobody home in a machine. And people that I've talked to in AI agree. There's nobody home. There's no self. A machine is still a machine, no matter how good a calculator it is. So Marius shares a little bit of wisdom. Unlike the AI, we do not entirely understand our internal states and motivations. So we try to know ourselves better in relationship with others. It's a recursive interaction, dialogical relationship we have with our families and friends. And even this evening here in our discussion, we get to know ourselves while we're interacting with one another. That incompleteness, now here's something I find significant in theological anthropology. That incompleteness drives us, so we have an inner impulse, compulsion, to seek the companionship of other humans, and it is arguably one of the main drivers of our religiosity, of why we seek God. So in the Imago Dei, you and I have a built-in inclination toward God. Will our computer have that? Will superintelligence have that? One more thing, as I've on this question of can AI technology enhance the Imago Dei, I've talked to virtue theorists. We find them amongst the Roman Catholics and the Methodists. I'm a Lutheran. Unfortunately, we don't believe in sanctification. That's an overstatement, by the way. But those who really do pursue sanctification place two things in the conversation that decisively make the answer no, AI cannot enhance the Imago Dei. Number one, free will cooperation. You and I have to choose. You can't ask AI to make our decisions for us. Then there's a synergy, that is to say, a cooperative will with the Holy Spirit that leads to virtue, the development of virtue over a period of time. So I just want to say, at least in my brief survey, no, virtue theorists are going to say AI technology is going to offer nothing to help us. With the Orthodox, it gets a little more complicated because sanctification is now full-fledged theosis or deification. Here's Ian Curran writing on behalf of the Orthodox. While the Christian tradition does not share with techno-humanism a vision of deification as integral to the human story, its understanding of the source, means, and ultimate end of this radical transformation of human beings is substantially different. We're driving a wedge now between Orthodox deification on the one hand and the transhumanist vision on the other. For Christians, deification is the work of the Christian deity. Deification is only possible because Christ deifies human nature in the incarnation, and the Spirit sanctifies human persons in the common life of the church and in our engagements with the wider world. No sympathy whatsoever with transhumanism in general or Christian transhumanism in particular. Well, back to Noreen, and she's going to build on the relationalist understanding of the Imago Dei. And she's also a physicalist. She doesn't really find anything attractive to cybernetic immortality or machine intelligence. What matters most in our humanity is not our intelligence, which is, after all, given to us in different measures and too soon taken away by illness or death. Rather, the image of God is found whenever two or three meet in authentic relationship. Okay, I've only got a couple more slides and then I'm done. In light of Elon Musk and his colleagues giving us the "let's take a time out" letter, what ought we do? Well, in the conversation, I find the word guardrail appears frequently. That is to say, maybe government or cultural influence. Here's Neville Rochow. I'm not sure if I know how to pronounce his name correctly. We are somnambulating towards an AI dystopia, so we got to wake up. What are those guardrails going to look like? He says, we still fail to see the threat that unprecedented power of AI in the hands of supranational corporations pose. So that's kind of the global grip that AI might get on worldwide economic and political systems. What's the solution? An obvious solution is international application of human rights norms to the writing, design, and engineering of all AI, IA, AGI, and hopefully super intelligence. Okay, I like that idea. You know, my kids don't behave, I pass rules. But the skeptics are going to say, well, what about those people who don't obey the rules? After all, everybody has access to AI. So maybe using old-fashioned survival of the fittest evolutionary language, the rule breakers are likely to develop stronger and more powerful AI than the rule followers. So this might actually be putting a noose around our own necks. Just want to put a plug in for the group AI and Faith, a small group of people mainly from Microsoft in the Seattle area. It's an interreligious group. Christians are prominent, but a number of Muslims and Hindus as well. They are talking about these things. Finally, the image of God. What should we think theologically? Should we agree with the common consensus that it's intelligence or reason that makes us distinctively human and distinctively godlike? No, I don't think so. Intelligence is a wonderful treasure, but it's not definitive. Should we go backwards in time, become like Adam and Eve before the fall? No. Forward in time to become more Christ-like. I like St. Paul's position in the epistles. Christ is the new Adam that you and I anticipate. Bye-bye. That's it. This is one of my fictional novels that takes transhumanism as its in its plot. That's all I've got to say. I want to turn it over. I'm anxious to hear what Marius has to say.
Thank you very much, Ted. Fascinating. Yeah, I enjoy that question. Well, of course, there's a lot of gems that you offered tonight for you. But I particularly enjoy that question, are we asking machines to become moral, which for me, being more familiar with patristic studies and hagiography and all that, this reminds me of an older question. Are we asking animals to behave morally? And this is something that hagiographers, or rather experts in hagiography, grapple with these days when they stumble on stories of animals and saints. And that's perhaps something to talk about later. But because time runs and flies and all that, let's hear from Marius.
It is a real pleasure to respond to someone who I've been reading and admiring for many years now. Thank you, Ted, for mapping this space for us to think about these things. And also a pleasure to be invited by ISCAST, an organization that is setting a very high standard in the field of science and religion in terms of the events they are organizing. And it seems to be a very tight ship. That's my impression. So when it comes to transhumanism, I think it is interesting to note that transhumanism, like any religion, has some diversity of beliefs. So we cannot engage with it as a monolith. For simplicity, I will refer to two camps. There is one camp of the militant atheist transhumanists, the ones that think we are superstitious, as Ted mentioned, of the likes of Ray Kurzweil, who happily preach there is no God, we are the gods, so we should act accordingly. What is fascinating about humans, what is fascinating actually about this transhumanists is the extent to which their discourse is often marked by profoundly religious tropes, as Ted showed. So in a sense, they still regard the human being as distinctive and being destined for future glory, but just in a different way. For these transhumanists, we humans are special because in us and through us, the cosmos awakens. And because we are positioned at a turning point in the history of life in the universe, the point where life takes control of its own evolution. For these reasons, they think, we also bear a huge responsibility because the universe longs to be saturated with intelligence. And we can and should contribute to that by augmenting ourselves to be capable of accelerating this process. And we should create AI to colonize the galaxy and the observable universe and so on. And I believe this kind of thinking is easily criticizable from a Christian perspective. And I've done quite a bit of that. Because at a closer analysis, it can be revealed as nothing more than a pseudo-religion built on highly dubious assumptions. For example, the one that the universe is longing for intelligence. As Ted put it, evolution doesn't aim at anything. And if you look closely, it's just really a very bad theology that they are doing. That's my impression. But then there is the other camp of transhumanists, this Christian transhumanists, which I think they raise more serious and interesting questions, because they share with standard Christianity the belief that we are created in the image of God and that we should aim to cultivate this image. The only difference is in how to get there. So in the methodology, if you want, traditional Christianity teaches about enhancing the image of God, the divine spark in us, through effort, sacrifice, and divine grace. Christian transhumanists agree with all that, but they also point out that there are ways to accelerate or shortcut this process. We might enhance the divine image and become better humans through technology and medicine. Now, my guess is that most of us here more or less agree in being suspicious of such views, and I certainly agree with Ted in this. So I think it would be quite easy to preach to the choir and dismiss or even deride such questions. But I think it is more valuable for us to take such perspectives seriously, at least for the sake of the debate, and see whether we can learn anything from probing their assumptions. So for example, if I could undergo genetic treatment to correct some genes associated with psychopathy, why should I not do it? If there were brain implants that would radically augment my intelligence, why not do it? Wouldn't I be more like God if I were more intelligent? Well, you could reply, it sounds a bit like cheating, and you would probably be right. But think about this one. Many years ago, I was at an Eastern Orthodox monastery on Mount Athos in Greece. And at 9 p.m., the monks were drinking coffee to prepare themselves for the all-night vigil that was about to begin. Well, that's a bit like doping, I thought. They were using technology to overcome an inherent weakness of their human nature in order to carry out a challenging spiritual exercise that would eventually benefit them and make them grow perhaps in the Imago Dei. So this is, of course, very different from taking a pill that would instantly make you more virtuous. But my question is there a continuum between the two? You might be surprised, but I think there is. Instead of concluding that what the monks were doing is wrong and unfair, I conclude instead that there are good and acceptable ways of using technology and medicine to flourish, and there are others that are highly dubious, and there are many things in between, and they are rather difficult to categorize. So instead of this simple dichotomy of natural good, technology bad, I think what we need is principles and criteria to discern on a case-by-case basis. I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here, but you see my point. My attempt to sketch such principles and criteria is somewhere along these lines. When it comes to the Imago Dei, I think it becomes very important how we define the image. Because if you believe that what makes us like God are our intellectual capacities, as Ted explained, an idea that I suspect is very popular in Christian transhumanism, then the possibility of augmenting these intellectual capacities becomes very appealing. However, as Ted pointed out, theological anthropology is moving towards more sophisticated definition of the Imago Dei, which are more about relationality and relationship than about intelligence. And even when you think about intelligence, there are various types of intelligence, and they are not equal to each other. And that's something we do in our current project on understanding spiritual intelligence. So I think the Christian transhumanists might be operating with an outdated theology, and one that frankly is even ethically dangerous, because if you think through the consequences of this model in terms of how many people it excludes the people with intellectual disability from the image of God, which is supposed to be universal, then it becomes more problematic. But even if we understand our humanness, so to push this forward, if we understand our humanness and the image of God in relational terms, as I propose, I think there is still a question of what if we could enhance our relational abilities through tech? This is a serious question, and let me show you through some examples. Think of radical life extension that Ted mentioned in the slide with the bearded guy, Aubrey de Grey. If we're speaking of eradicating death, then yes, I think Christians could raise multiple theological and ethical objections. And most people actually, I don't think they would even want to live forever in this body, in this world, because that would come to resemble more hell than heaven. But then think, if you offered me 50 or 100 additional years to my life through some technological or medical breakthrough, then suddenly that doesn't sound that bad, right? Because if you think about it, it is actually a shame that precisely when people become wiser, when they finally start understanding what's going on in their lives and relationships, when they become more spiritual and religious, that's when they unfortunately start aging and dying. So wouldn't it be wonderful if we could add a couple of more wise decades at the end of our lives? And wouldn't that make us better humans and more in the image of God if we just had more time to explore and grow? This is just to show you that things are not so black and white. Now think of this other example. There are people who report very interesting and transformative experience with psychedelics. Some of them speak of epiphany-like moments with as little as one session with certain drugs. And this is an experience that completely changes how they see themselves embedded into the world and in relationship with others. People report overcoming trauma or transcending the previously narrow understanding of their personal histories. And in doing so, radically improving their relationships. How is this not a good thing? And why not use such shortcuts if we could improve other aspects of our moral and spiritual lives? Psychedelics are a hot potato. It's I think there are. It's very, very controversial, and we don't know yet what they actually do. So I'm not gonna propose that. I'm just saying that there are people who say they do it and they benefited from it in a way that we could interpret as growth in the image of God. So I'm just pushing the argument to the edge here, and I don't have a good answer to such questions, if I am to be honest. I have only two things that come to mind. One is the idea that such technology that would only enhance your abilities without damaging anything does not exist. Technology always promises to fix things, and it looks good on paper, but when you actually implement it, there are things that get lost. Think about, for example, if you told somebody 50 years ago about internet and social media, they will say, oh, this will so much enhance our relationships with each other. And then if you look what actually happens with the radicalization all the negativity and the psychological damage that is caused by such things, then you think again. But these are consequences you probably couldn't have foreseen. And this, to me, reminds me of the first humans in the Garden of Eden who were trying to augment themselves in a way by eating the apple. So you could think that that is a bit of like technology. And what they got, what was literally what the snake promised. So they did come to know good and evil. So in a way, the snake was truthful, but not in a way they expected. So they lost something in that process as well. So maybe such quick fixes from technology could improve some things, but while damaging others. And my second potential response is perhaps that such quick enhancements cannot completely substitute persistence in the more traditional methods of human enhancement, which are ascesis, so ascesis in Greek, self-sacrifice, the cultivation of virtues slowly in time and in relationships to other humans. The tortoise beats the hare on the long run, if you want, or something like no pain, no gain. And I say this because even people who discover through psychedelics glimpses of what their minds are capable of, most of them ultimately turn to meditation and other more traditional and effortful approaches towards those same goals. So you cannot just take psychedelics all day long, is what a friend told me. Ultimately, you want to become capable of those things through natural means, let's put it like that. And I think the same is true in the lives of great spiritual figures across religions. The epiphanies are very important in the beginning of their journey, but the more they mature spiritually, the less frequent such extraordinary experiences become, and the more they focus on developing their spiritual gifts in the reality of everyday life and in relationship with their neighbors. So to summarize, my tentative conclusion is that technology can actually help us on our journey toward becoming better humans, but with two caveats. Likely not in the simplistic and intellectually focused way that many transhumanists claim. And also, technology can never completely replace our own efforts. After all, to come back to my monastic anecdote, even if I drank a liter of coffee that evening, which I may well do since I woke up today at 5 a.m. So even if I drank all that coffee, I could not pray with the intensity, humility, and purity of heart of those Athonite monks. So coffee was not everything there. Thank you.
Thank you, Marius. Yeah, by referring to personal efforts, virtue, the divine grace as a way of enhancing human nature, I believe you agree with Ted, who seems to me at least embraces the idea of synergy or cooperation as instrumental towards human development. And you both question the view that God's image in us amounts to being intelligent. So fascinating stuff. And before other people have questions to ask or comments to make, I'd rather have Ted give a response if he sees fit to Marius's comments.
No, I was quite happy about Marius's judicious analysis, and I think sorting out what's going on with the religious transhumanists, especially the Christian transhumanists. On the one hand, I find the Christian transhumanists exciting. They're high-minded and well-motivated. But on the other hand, they do need some refinement with regard to the anthropology, I think, et cetera. So there definitely are ways in which technology can enhance our health and well-being, which then indirectly might enhance our spirituality. But when I talk with virtue theorists and other people concerned about sanctification or theosis, boy, they all want that human will in there, and technology is not going to do it for us. At any rate, I don't want to be a naysayer. I just want to say I think to be realistic, that has to be emphasized in a way that maybe there's a certain naivete on the part of both the atheist transhumanists as well as the religious transhumanists.
But is there anything to prevent us, say, believers, Christian theologians, Christian thinkers, from embracing the idea of enhancement, development, betterment of human nature? And now both Ted and Marius, feel free to interact, whatever, fight each other and the rest of us. And I also invite anyone else to have a say on these matters. So are we in principle against the idea of development?
I'm in favor of development and progress. I just don't want to ask more of it than it can deliver. And I think I may be of one mind with Marius on this one.
Yes,
if I can drink coffee and stay awake and listen to the pastor's sermon, I'm going to drink that coffee.
Yes.
And also, I liked one of Marius's nuances. Yes, maybe the idea that we could live forever through radical life extension. That seems unfeasible for biological reasons, maybe even undesirable, but you could argue, as Marius did so eloquently, that there are some people my age, maybe I'm not one of them, who've gained wisdom and sound judgment. And that's why elders in so many societies are the people that give the advice that everybody listens to. Why not give them another 20 years if we could do it medically? So I don't think there should be any Christian reason for being Luddites or, putting up barriers to technological advancement. None whatsoever. I just think we don't want to ask more of technological advance than what it can deliver. Don't turn technological advance into a religion.
Marius, any thoughts?
Indeed, it seems that when we engage with a radical version of an argument, which can be a little bit of a straw man, it's very easy to dismiss it. But my point was, if you take it just in tiny steps, each step along that way seems to be a good one and preferable one. So it's not easy to draw an easy boundary, but there are principles we can use to think about these things. Why I approach the kind of devil's advocate perspective in my response is that I think it's very easy to just postulate divine grace, the soul, a divine spark in humans that makes us like God, whatever that is. And once you do that, of course, then you also exclude the possibility that machines will ever have it. But I think what you also do is you just remain at the level of very easy answers and we can tell each other that and be happy and go go back home thinking that we are right and they are wrong. But I think a more productive discussion, which can also engage people who do not necessarily share our assumptions about what it means to be in the image of God, if there is a God in the first place, could be to try to take this kind of thing seriously, and also show that, well, exactly as Ted said, we are not Luddites, and if it makes sense for our purposes, why not? But then what you actually see when you engage with the real things, not the imaginary, the speculative technologies, is what I said, that it always has some downsides. It looks very good on paper, and that's what I discovered when I was thinking about artificial superintelligence, because people will only project these good things on it. But if you look at what AI actually is doing right now, that's not really how it goes. So the discussion about superintelligence is, well, will it be a good God or a bad God? And the only thing about a bad God is that it will not be aligned with our purposes, as Ted said, and then it will destroy us by accident. But then it seems that if you do solve that problem, and if you do make it aligned with human values, then it would just be great if it could give us all this plenty and solve all our problems. So it's very hard to argue against that, because people say, what's wrong with solving cancer and global poverty and so on, which they think AI could do. And yeah, this is where theologians, I think, could bring some nuance by showing that, well, first of all, it's never like that. And second, technology is never like that. And second of all, there are some things that are important to preserve about human nature that we want to think first before delegating everything to AI.
Yeah, as in, I can have a coffee to keep me alert, but not necessarily to ask my congregation, my parishioners, to refer their queries to ChatGPT. Have you? Well, yeah, Marius, I think you know there's a Romanian priest who has created a website which is called the ChatGPT Church. Have you seen that one? Oh yeah, I'm a fan of that website, and you can do confession via ChatGPT and ask for prayers and so on and so forth. So the priest's job is quite easy to perform. Let's return to more of this after we hear from Neil. Neil, please.
Thank you, Doro. Thank you, Ted and Marius. It just sort of struck me, like when we were first building computers, and the original sort of conception of computers is that they would try and mimic human mind. Okay, we'd make machines like the human mind. Now that we've got them, we want to turn the human mind into a giant computer. So, we used to be warned against anthropomorphizing. And I think, there's a fair bit of anthropomorphizing that goes on in relationship to computers. But the other side of it is that we're sort of robotomorphizing humans, that we're turning, and it's based on an understanding of intelligence as calculative reason. And linked with that very much is a conception of power. So that when Marius talked about, we'd be more intelligent, we'd be more like God. Well, the prime characteristic of God in the New Testament is God is love, not God is intelligent. And if we wanted to truly be more like God, we'd want to be more loving, not more intelligent. So there is an agenda there. I think the shift to calculative reason is closely tied with not the desire to be more loving, but to be more powerful, and to be able to then transcend various limitations that we have because we're more powerful. But it doesn't necessarily make us more godlike in any way, shape or form. So I suppose I see there's a sort of a mechanomorphizing of human existence into something which is far less than human in this transhumanist agenda. I suppose there are various other things I could say. One which I think is important is the classical tradition, say Aquinas, which I'm more familiar with, would always think of will or our moral faculties in terms of rational desire. So that sees a strong connection between intelligence and morality, that we should desire what is reasonable, because what is reasonable is the right thing to do. So if we think this problem of whether machines can be moral is inseparable from the question of the nature of intelligence itself. And that's again a sign, I think, that if we just reduce intelligence to calculate rationality, we're really selling ourselves short. Our intelligence is much more than just calculation. Anyway, just some comments.
I concur that if there is any trait that is lifted up in the New Testament that connects the human with the divine, it is clearly love, not reason, not intelligence, not that there's anything disparaging about those, but it's really love, whether you're talking about the Gospel of John or the epistles of Paul or what have you. That's really the case. I like Plato a lot, and Plato is going to merge the rational with what is true and the good. Whenever human reason really follows its natural inclinations to its own fulfillment, it embraces the good and the true.
Yeah.
So there is, at least in that form of realism, there is a built-in level of trust for what is good. But I think the New Testament understanding of love is not just what's good, it's a mandate to love others for the full flourishing of the beloved. And you don't get that from reason. It has to come from divine mandate, it seems to me. So as wonderful as reason and intelligence are, they're not the last word.
I think if I may jump in, sorry, Neil, I think this topic of love, relationality is crucial here. Well, at least when we try to make sense of ourselves. And I think what we should bring in this equation, precisely because of what Ted just said, that it's not natural or rational for us to love, actually. Marius's point about ascesis, about sort of struggling, exercising our will towards loving, towards overcoming the beast within, say, selfish drives and so on and so forth, in order to develop a true God-like, loving person. What do you reckon?
I think both Marius and Ted picked up on wisdom. And wisdom is the flowering of intelligence. It's the fall. Like there's one of the phrases I often use is God is loving wisdom and wise loving. Like it's the interaction of that wisdom and that loving which produces the world in which we exist. And it's that the long debate around the relationship between the good and the reasonable, I think is, or reasoning and will, or whatever you want to put it, the heart, the mind, all those sort of things, really is a central issue. I don't want to say too much. I'm sure other people have questions too. So,
until anyone else would jump in, I'd like to return to Ted's Platonism, to the concept of nous, so badly translated in most whatever resources today as intelligence sometime, and so on and so forth. Well, let's call it nous or mind or whatever we have to call it, which is the inner person, and so on and so forth. But I think there's something, there's something that bothers me in that description offered earlier based on Alexei Nesteruk's appraisal of the topic, where this faculty, the nous, becomes the big thing in the relationship between humans and AI. And I think that that's not quite a traditional patristic understanding of the nous. Yeah, we can speak of a potential nous, spiritual mind, if you like, present in all human beings, but it's not activated as such. And again, this harks back to the topic of ascetic reshaping of one's nature. I would rather suggest that the spiritual intellect, nous, whatever we want to call it, marks the difference between saints and all other animals, human and otherwise. It's not something that marks naturally the difference between human and animal. I don't know how this can help our discussion about if there's a difference between human intelligence and AI, but I would say that we can't simply extrapolate a patristic or Platonic rather term for this discussion, as it's something that it's a given and all human beings access and actualize their nous, their spiritual mind.
I completely agree with that. And I think this is a sort of one of the sins of early superficial engagement, because we were looking for the one thing that distinguishes humans from everything else. And when you're looking for simple answers, that's what you're going to get, and you're going to simplify a tradition that is much more nuanced and complex than that. So I agree with that, but I think that also this is why it is fruitful for us to engage with this radical hypothesis, even if for the sake of exercise, because in doing so, I think we can verify a little bit our own theological discourse and see whether some things were too vague or they need more specification, or maybe it's the same thing that I was thinking when Neil mentioned the idea that it's not intelligence that's typical of human nature, and of course it's not. But if you take patristic thought and you engage with it just superficially, then you see that, okay, the Holy Fathers say that it's reason. Humans are the rational animal, going on the Aristotelian tradition, and then Gregory of Nyssa and others. And then you think, okay, it's reason what makes us like God, so it's reason what distinguishes us from the animals. So this is the thing that we ought to pursue when we're building machines. And we've done that to a certain extent, even to an impressive extent. And the machine's logical abilities are arguably better than ours. We are biased by all kinds of mental these cognitive biases that we have that sometimes are counterproductive. Well, they get us by most of the time, but machines don't have those. And we see what that kind of intelligence produces, and it's very non-human-like, and it's not something that we would like to become. So even if we don't agree with the assumptions behind AI, it is very fruitful for us to just dig a little bit deeper in our theology to understand why we don't agree, and to steer away from easy answers. So and then of course what you see is that of course reason was never divorced from the moral dimension and from the affective dimension. And of course, if you look at Christ, the prototype image of God, super intelligence is not the first thing that comes to your mind. And if people in Silicon Valley or elsewhere in China, if they are trying to really create an artificial human, and this is the project, maybe intelligence was not the focus all along. Maybe this is the message that Christians could bring. If you want to ask us what it is to be human after a few thousand years of thinking about this, we can tell you that it's not intelligence. Maybe it's empathy, maybe it's humility, it's love, as you mentioned, but certainly intelligence is not that high up. But on the other hand, intelligence has to play some role, because if if God needed us to become something through evolution in order for God to incarnate as a human, because God did not incarnate as a cockroach, as far as we think, then there must be some abilities there that are necessary for the human being to develop in order to become a partner in relationship with God and the receptacle of revelation. And intelligence has to do something with that. I mean, you cannot completely rule out intelligence of the equation, but then you have to think what kind of intelligence, and is it just the kind of intelligence that ChatGPT is developing, or is it, and if it's not, what is missing there? And I think this is really the space where theologians could step in and actually contribute to the global debate on the nature of intelligence and AI.
This is, I think, very significant for purposes of our meetings in this series, because what we try to discover, pinpoint, is actually the Christian difference, or a Christian answer, specifically Christian answer to topics, challenges, trends of our day and age. And I think what I have heard so far from all of you is that, yes, we should adopt a more holistic kind of understanding of the image of God in us, theological anthropology, to put it so, in order to be able to ascertain what a human being is, and then to measure everything else, including our creations, technological and so on and so forth, from a more, let's say, holistic and wholesome viewpoint. But there's a question from Charles. Could you please unmute yourself? Great, Charles.
Okay, thanks, Daru. And thank you both to Ted and Mario. I noticed in both of your talks, you stayed away from the limitations on the science that the transhumanists are hoping to develop. For example, is their aim to live forever something like trying to create a perpetual motion machine? Should we engage in the science and its limitations, or should we stay clear of that and just focus on the human, what it means to be human, the way that you two did?
The limitations of the science. One thing that came to mind when talking about radical life extension is I worked as a consultant for a while with the Geron Corporation when they were first isolating human embryonic stem cells. And the original mandate for the Geron Corporation was immortality, radical life extension. But upon researching it, they discovered that the human body can only live to a maximum of 120 years. There are so many forces which make that the limit. And so they gave up the idea of pursuing immortality. And so stem cell therapy is aimed at rejuvenating organs so that you and I can live healthy right up to 3 days before we die at the age of 120. So that's their goal. Well, if that's correct, then death is not a disease. It's a factor in what it means to be biological in character. And so the radical life extensionists are working with a faulty assumption here and making, so there are probably a number of ways in which people who are scientifically in the know, and that's not me, who probably are going to have to point out what the limits of these visions are. I've cited Noreen Hertzfeld a few times here. And there was also a roboticist at MIT some 20 years ago named Anna Fust. And she even came and lectured in Australia for a while. And she noticed that intelligence has to do with the extremities of our bodies and what our fingers learn from connections with the physical world. And she could say, we have intelligence in the fingers. It's not just limited to the brain. So the idea of getting the pattern from the brain as software and then uploading it into a silicon substrate ain't gonna work, scientifically speaking, because it's faulty assumptions about the nature of the human mind. So it would take a better person than me to adumbrate all of the scientific limits, and they are there. I think the maybe misguided assumptions of AI people or transhumanist people are things that we can deal with regard to the Christian tradition, what we've learned about human nature over the centuries. Maybe we could do that as theologians, but it'd take somebody with more inside knowledge on the relevant sciences than I have to do the task, Charles, that you just recommended.
I would just say that it is sometimes a bit dangerous to postulate that things are impossible. It reminds me a bit of the God of the gaps argument. We can speak of an anthropology of the gaps now and look at what it's currently impossible to do and think, oh, this is what it is to be really human. And I'm looking at how fast the debates in AI have evolved over the past decades and how many people were just postulating, pontificating that AI machines will never be able to do this. For example, when symbolic AI failed to achieve common sense or to understand context in the 1960s or so. So they were always preaching that well, AI will cease to progress. And now we see what ChatGPT does, and it's impressive. I mean, it doesn't have common sense yet, but the kind of conversations that you can have with it are, I mean, I think it can pass the Turing test. So no question about that. So, but it's achieved through a very different technology, and we know it's not human-like. So again, the humanness is not in danger, but it's just to show that sometimes you can achieve things in unexpected ways. And even if you cannot, the human body cannot live past 120, I think what people are talking about mind uploading in the computer, which of course is fraught with philosophical and theological questions about identity and about feasibility. But then there's a milder version of that, which is gradual replacement of body parts. And this is always predicated on wishful thinking about technology. Indeed, they always think about technology that doesn't yet exist, and they hope it will exist in a few decades or so. But if you think about it, replacing cells one by one, inserting nanobots in your immune system, even replacing neurons, or which may in practice turn out to be such a difficult and complex thing that you could never do it. But who knows, maybe you can partially do it and then you can break that 120 limit. So I think it is useful to point out that there is a sort of naivety in the transhumanist discourse about the potential of technology, but it's also good not to go to the other extreme and never say never, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Very good.
we did the same with animal citizen, and now we discover that there's intelligence, there's some kind of level of awareness, self-awareness in animals, including love and tradition and wisdom and so on and so forth. I think Neil has something else to say, but Neil, again, please briefly, because we have only.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Look, I just want to jump in when Marius said, computers understand. I think that's really an example of anthropomorphizing. Computers can calculate certain things, but they don't understand. That's a different thing. That's a different operation altogether. Human beings understand. And we're familiar with the act of understanding itself. And we know when we don't understand and when we know when we do understand. But a machine calculates, and that's all it does. And to say that it understands is just, again, it's to anthropomorphize a machine calculation. I don't see any evidence that machines understand. For the first thing, understanding is a conscious activity. Like you don't understand things when you're unconscious. So if you're saying they understand, then you're saying they're conscious. And again, there's no evidence for that. So sorry, just a quick comment.
Did I say that the machine understands?
Yeah, you did.
I could push it further, and I would say the machine doesn't even calculate. It's the human that calculates using this artificial, this
I'll
digital
agree.
abacus, if
I'll
you
agree.
want. So yes, but we are. I mean, we don't have words for what machines do, and then we use these words that are very low, understanding, learning, speaking
I
back.
don't mind.
And yes, so I completely agree with you, and I did not want to imply that ChatGPT understands, but a human mind could project that on it. It's true.
But again, Marius, never say never, isn't it? We don't know one day what might happen.
Yes,
And this is, I assume this is something that worries a lot of people out there, Christians and of other backgrounds. What might happen tomorrow? Maybe they don't understand, although even the idea of understanding is, of course, very anthropomorphic. Maybe whatever they do is a different story altogether. The way with dolphins, you know, do dolphins understand the way we understand? The same goes for ChatGPT, and I don't know what other machines tomorrow will replace it. But never say never. I think the future is open. That's the idea, and perhaps our task is, rather than saying, well, it won't happen, it can't happen. Our task is to be prepared for when it will happen. At least that's my view. Once again, thank you very much, Ted, Marius, and all that have contributed, and all of you who are present, and also those who will be watching this recording on Eastcast's YouTube channel. Bye-bye, farewell, and Godspeed.